Okay. Yeah, it's really exciting to be here. I'm Itamar Friedman, the CEO and co-founder of Qodo, formerly known as Codium, and actually it relates to what we're talking today. Like one of our first tool was Alpha Codium, but I'll share about that like in a few minutes and why it's related to today's like webinar. But before that, also doing other introductions. I'll let you speak, but I just say Yoav is from the Qodo team. And if you don't know Harrison by now, then I don't know. I'm not sure what you're doing in this panel, but still, Harrison, maybe you want to like uh, introduce yourself.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me and excited to be here. My name's Harrison, co-founder, CEO of LangChain, backgrounds in ML ops, and have been we've known each other for a while now, Itamar. So
Yeah,
it's great to do a panel together.
yeah, totally. And I'll share more about that in a minute. Yoav?
Yeah, my name is Yoav. I'm a R&D team lead in Qodo for almost a year, and previously to that was researchers around deep learning and ML. And yeah, very excited to be here.
Thank you. Itamar Friedman, as I mentioned, the CEO and co-founder of Qodo, and mostly mastered in machine learning starting 2006, and eventually I did a lot of machine learning in Alibaba. So part of those team that trained models in Alibaba back in 2017 to 2021. And somewhere towards the end of 21, or more accurately 2022, realized that AI doing code completion is going to be just a beginning of what we are going to experience as developers, and wanted to tackle one of the most complicated aspect of software development, which is like the writing code that actually works, or if you like, checking what's underneath the surface with building software, which including like testing, code review, maintainability, refactor, like basically building uh, uh, enterprise grade or large scale like software. And then like one of the thoughts that we had back then is that like autocomplete is not going to achieve that, and we need to go agentic. That was already like in early 2023. By the way, we were part of the like AutoGPT team and doing things like that. And here's like how we saw things. I'm going to explain a bit our system one, system two, two thinking like really fast. But eventually that led to like an open source tool that we called Alpha Codium. And we came out with Alpha Codium, I think like 2 weeks before we saw LangGraph coming out. And I was like, sorry for saying it live, like, holy shit, if we had LangGraph like before we started Alpha Codium, then we probably like based on that. Then we said the next time we're going to do an agentic workflow, we have to look on LangGraph. And that's exactly what we did and what we released today. So I have like a few slides just explaining a bit about, the reasoning behind why using LangGraph, etc. And then I thought really quickly like show a couple of demos and then like have open discussions. Why did we choose LangGraph? Some technical aspect of it. Harrison, maybe you can share like why did you came up with it, and I'm sure we can jam together because we passed like a long way with LangGraph. Okay, cool. So basically, I think the good old days of autocomplete was a lot about system one thinking. It means that you took an input, you put it into like you bring some context, put it into a model, and you get like an output. But then like 2024 was all about system 1.5 thinking. You do a chain of thought. It could be a chain of thought as part of the model. It could be a part of the workflow. The models themselves, like R1, DeepSeek, O1 or 3, they do build in chain of thought, but it's not enough, and we're going to talk about it. If you want to bring some stability to the workflow, you want to control that chain of thought with a graph that you control. So these are like the next like evolution of a thinking process. And eventually, I think we're building towards a future of system two thinking, but there is a gap between what we have today in system 1.5 to 2. And I think it's an agent that like it's not only have predefined workflows or workflow flows that it's building as it goes, but also actually is quite aware of its task and the team that is working in and the environment and being able to understand what it's capable of and what's not. It's like it's more like almost like an agent, a human agent that is aware of its goals and its environment. I think like even if it's an AI agent, it has to have similar or so like capabilities, and that's like how we think like the future is. And if you think as people, I think we have built in like flows on how we do things. We have flexibility, like right? We can take a flow, break it, and restructure it. We can choose which flow we want, but we still we were trained. We trained ourselves or at school or university, whatever, to have a few paradigms on how we do things, and then we try to understand which one we want to apply. Um, as a CEO, like I can come to a board meeting and just do whatever I want, or we can do a structure way of thinking, and that works better if eventually, and that's how we think about things. Yeah, so like the traditional AI coding is very single step, like very prompt based, like basic context understanding, very basic tool usage, etc. And the agentic coding that we see already in the market is like more multi-step, autonomous, broader state of management, etc. And I think that for us, it's a lot about tool utilization, having the memory, task decomposition, being goal-oriented, have reasoning capabilities. But more than all, like we do believe that there needs to be designated flows and needs to be designated agent that has specific like tasks. So for example, you can use LangGraph to build different type of flows that are not just one node that does, let the model decides everything what it does, but actually has different tasks throughout the process because it has different like goals as an agent. And that's how we thought about things, and that's one of the reasons. And we'll elaborate more about the usage of LangGraph. And it happens to be that today we launched Qodo Gen 1.0 in JetBrains and in VS Code with the usage of MCP, etc. And we also launched it on Product Hunt. If you want to support us, it's happening as we speak. So one of the cool MCPs, a list of MCPs that we see are very useful for agentic flows is around like things like documentation, fetching documentation from different location, ticketing management, issue tracker, connecting to different code analysis tool, reading coverage reports, etc. And now you can leave like the tool usage to the agent to decide completely by itself. Or again, you can build a workflow that helps you, put these like usage of tools still with some freedom, but with some structure. Yeah, so that like it's exactly what we did with Alpha Codium and with that tool you can win coding competition. Even it does better if than O3. If you using O3, it does better than O3 with the same amount of compute because we did a workflow. And then we thought that we must use a tool that help us, building those graphs, building those flows in a consistent and reliable way, and we came eventually using LangGraph. So that's the context, and I think like what we want to talk about today is like showing live examples, and then talking about our why we chose LangGraph and some like issues, and hear about Harrison like vision and where it's going. So just before Yoav show us some example, I don't know if you guys want to share anything so far, any thoughts?
I'm excited to see a demo and examples. Maybe the only thing I'll share is that I think like you made some comment about how LangGraph came out like a week or two, or maybe like a day or two after kind of like Alpha Codium, and I still remember that because it was like the Alpha Codium paper was a perfect descriptor of kind of like what we were trying to enable. Like you talked about this flow, you called it flow engineering, and that was the first time I heard that, and that really stuck with me as a term. And I think yeah, and I use that term all the time now. And so I love that. And so I think like it's a I think like it's an interesting it's an interesting data point because it just shows how like separately and independently we kind of like arrived at similar ideas, and like that's really where the space, and we arrived at it by talking to a bunch of people who were doing similar things. And so this is kind of like what like we've worked with a bunch of companies over the past year to put agents in production. All of them have custom kind of like flows, and so I think like that's just something that's that's how agents are built these days. I think flow engineering was a great term, and so is great to think back on kind of like that.
Yeah, it could be like even a day or two. Yeah, I remember that. So uh, back in the days, the name of the company Qodo was Codium, and that's why we call it Alpha Codium. Actually, the reason for Codium was because the original paper was Alpha Code by DeepMind, and they had like a flow, but it was actually based on two steps. And we believe that there need to be like 12 or so, but we wanted to give them credit, so we call the company Codium, knowing that one day we'll do Alpha Codium. Yeah, so that's a history. Like I think we met before, but that was actually like a very good moment to get even more in touch. And with that, like before we jump into some technical details and how we use like LangGraph and etc., maybe see just a couple of examples, or we can start with one you have and have a discussion, then show others. So you have you can take the
Cool. I want to start with
okay,
two
cool.
examples because it kind of like showcase the difference between in the agent's capabilities. So I actually want to start with something super simple. So you probably won't see what I'm typing because it's really small, but what you see on the left is our extension with the agentic mode. We still support the old standard chat that we have, but we're not going to showcase it today, obviously. And on the right, you can see obviously a file from our code base. And I actually want to start with kind of like a ChatGPT like prompt to the agent and see how it behaves. Basically, I just want to ask it a simple question like, what are the web servers frameworks in Python? And actually, I expect it to just give me back the results. I don't want to do it. I don't want it to do anything else. I just want to see the results of like, okay, tell me Fast API, the Django, Flask, etc. Okay, and why is this interesting? Because we want to see that now that we give it a different task, it uses very different tools. So we gave it a simple question that doesn't require any context. It doesn't require any context. But now let's try a very different thing. Let's say, for simplicity, we want to improve this file. We have this persistent graph class, probably needs a bit more of a hair ending, a bit more documentation. So let's ask for our agent to improve this file. And now, contrary to before, where it's just spit out the result, it's going to start and use tools. So for here, it's asking, okay, I need to get the code dependencies for this entire class because I want to get a much better understanding of this class before I factor it. I'm going to then read it. And then I'm going to use the code dependencies specifically for this persistent graph because this seems like the most important part. I also want to see the code usages because if I'm going to change something that affects another part of the code that is using this, I need to be aware of that. So it's using all of these tools in order to get a very good understanding of the code that it's going to change. After that, it's generating what we call an artifact. Okay, so instead of just kind of like showing you the diff, we're printing it as a new file for you to very easily view it. And you can see we added documentation, and you can see the explanation of what we did, type support and property structure. And I think we won't dive to exactly what the specifics here, but we can assume that it made it kept the logic, but made the class nicer and easier to use. And now if we want, we can generate a diff and then apply this code and get a new file. Okay. With that, can I continue to another demo, Itamar, or do you want to maybe brush on a point or two here?
Yeah, you ran over quickly. Like, maybe like you can summarize a bit, like give an example of MCPs that are being used here, and then maybe like hint about the stability and maybe why, like just not full answer, but give some hints on what we've seen here that later on you might be answering, why LangGraph, etc. If it makes sense, and then like
Yeah.
I think the next demo would be great.
Okay, so from a technical perspective, we have a graph of a couple section here. So the first section is basically the tool usage. And one of the reasons we liked LangGraph is because that, contrary to, I would say, a backend only system or a simple system where you can just have the agents run in loops, here we need to communicate with the IDE all the time. So we're leveraging the language server of the IDE in order to use the code dependencies and the code usages. So we need a way to be able to run the LLM, communicate with the IDE, and then continue back the execution. Also, this is a structured flow, so it's not a single node. We have the code, the tool usage here, mostly around context collection. After that, we have a plan of how we're going to perform the changes. Then we have the execution itself, and then we have another node, which here isn't being operated, but it's a settings, and that's to generate the diff automatically. So we have another input at the end, and we're now winding this to also have tests generated in case we see relevant code that we want to test after that, or find the relevant test cases if existing.
Awesome. Any question, Harrison, before the next one? Maybe on your side? I think it's the first time you see it, right? I think everyone except of our design partners, alpha users, etc.
Yeah, you've mentioned MCPs kind of like a few times, and so I'm curious, like, and then you also mentioned tool usage. Like, are all the tools MCPs, or are there some built-in tools, or and we can maybe tackle this afterwards, but that stuck out at me a few times.
Yeah, so we're going to see this in the next demo. So we have built-in tools, but we've built them in a way that is the same interface as an MCP. Okay, so you can have more MCPs if you want to add custom MCP of your own, and we can add more MCPs on ourselves. But the one we use are internal, but they follow the same interface.
Do they actually run like MCP servers under the hood, or do they just have the same interface?
Just the same interface. So for example, for the file servers and for the LSPs, which we're using the IDE for that, we're not building our own server, just using the same interface. So it's just like an abstraction layer before using the functions.
And then how many tools total by default does this agent have?
Yeah, so you can see it here. So we have like 12 tools.
Oh, 12. Cool.
Okay, it's very, very easy to extend, and I'll see it in the next demo. We can actually jump to that demo if that's the more interesting part. We try very hard to minimize the number of tools, and when we say minimize, we're being smart about. So, for example, you have MCP that fetch information from the internet. Okay, so you have like fetch HTML and fetch Markdown and then fetch XML and very different type of fetches, and each one of them is a different tool. We try to combine them to a single tool. So the context of the model will be smaller. So we try to get as much context as possible in the smallest set of tools, because we see that smart tool selection equals better results and better benchmarks.
But by the way, I have like 33 tools that I use, and I think, like, roughly speaking, you learn, like, it works well as you learn how to prompt. Like, you can be a bit specific. You don't have to say use that tool, but you can say like search on the web or search in my repos, and it's enough you say that it will know to choose the right tool to go outside or inside. So I think like being a bit verbose and hinting what you want will bring the right tools. Having said that, I didn't try with hundreds and personally, and I'm not sure if that will work well.
Yeah, and one of the things that we're planning to add later on is smart tool selection. So having a first node to kind of like decide, giving the task, what are the right tools for that task, to kind of, again, minimize and having the best tools for the relevant context.
Awesome. Let's go to the second.
So I'm going to skip one of the demos and I'm going to jump right into the MCP one because it seems like everyone's talking about it. So So as you saw, I did it briefly. So we have like a web search MCP, and we have a playwright MCP. And just I'll say, like, I'm assuming 95% of the people here know what MCP, but for maybe there's 5% people who don't. So I'm going to say just one sentence about it. Basically, MCP, that stands for Model Context Protocol, and that's protocol for adding additional context for the model. That's done by mostly tool usage. So telling the model, hey, you have this tool at your disposal. And then the model say, okay, use this tool. The protocol works by the LLM sending that request to the MCP server and then getting the request back. And you have a better context for you in order to achieve your goal. I'm going to add two MCPs, web search, ability to search the web, and a playwright MCP. For those who are not familiar, playwright is a framework for writing mostly front-end tests. And I'm going to do this prompt, which I prepared in advance. So we're going to do something which is similar to kind of like a flow. So if you're developing a website, then you want to mimic a flow inside that website. And after you've done that flow and you see that it's working, you want to write a playwright test for either regression test or E2E test, different types. So basically telling it, okay, search for Qodo website online, navigate to it, go to the pricing page, assert that it contains Qodo, and then create an artifact, which is the code that we saw in the editor that replicates this flow in the playwright. So basically write the test for this flow. So let's see this in action. This is a complicated flow, so let's hope everything works as expected. So first of all, it's using the web search tool, searching for Qodo. Then it's using playwright navigate. Okay. Maybe it's somewhere here. The website didn't open. I'm going to do that again in a second. Okay, wait, let me try this one more time. As we mentioned, it's a bit dangerous to demo the same day of the deployment. Okay. Just let me make sure I've chosen the correct tools. Yes. We have them here. Great. Okay, as mentioned. Okay. I'm not sure why it's not opening browser.
Maybe it's opening in another window, the Chromium. Like sometimes I have a problem when presenting.
Yeah.
It probably did open it, but in another place, and then like you
Yeah,
didn't see it because of the
I'm
zoom.
looking for
But
it.
anyway, like in order to create this, like
Yeah. But anyway, it did use the MCP. I guess something went wrong with the survey usage, but we can see the usage of the tool. It did all this action, and then at the end, it did write the playwright test. Again, those familiar with playwright will recognize the syntax, kind of like mimicking the same flow that we did here. And again, if this was a front-end development, then you would basically building a regression test to make sure that this flow doesn't break once it is ready.
yeah. So just I want to share for those that didn't have the context, and Yoav let me know if I'm wrong. Basically, this tool, the Playwright tool, can, if you have the Chromium and Playwright installed in your environment, it actually opens up a Chromium, and you see this one that now Yoav presented.
Yeah, I'm going to close it.
It does like a computer use or operator, if you like, to crawl through the website to do the flow that it was given, and then it comes back with that information and write the playwright. Basically, it did it, but you didn't see the flow, and that how it works. So the one of the tricks here is having the right MCP, okay, and the right tools to use.
Yeah. What do you say? We'll give it one more shot.
Go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah, so the web search usually is done in the background, right? It doesn't open a browser commonly.
Yeah.
It might take time. And then using Playwright to navigate.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Okay. I promise it did work before, so I guess something
No
with the
worries.
setup changed. So
Yeah, well, once we talk, you can try to find out like the Chromium
yeah.
thingy. Any other flow you want to show before we move to like discuss things?
No, I guess that covers most of it.
Great. So do you, I think like the next step like is to discuss a bit like and that's one of the hot topics that we saw here in the Q&A that I'm trying to hectically like answer while you're demoing is like why LangGraph? And someone was a bit like poking like and saying, hey, Anthropic said that maybe it's not the right tool to use, and we use it and we're very happy. And like maybe you can share a bit, Yoav, about the selection.
Yeah, definitely. I think when we started the discussion about building our agent framework and what we wanted from it, I think I would say it comes down to two major requirements, high level wise, and that's flexibility. We want to be able to be very flexible in terms of what we can do. We didn't want to be. We have a lot of I would say important pieces of code or components that we need regarding on-prem deployments and different model usage and tracking and user limits that we wanted to make sure that we can use those and leverage those in whatever framework we chose. But then also giving us a structured way of building flows in a way that is easy to communicate, easy to work with, robust. And we viewed or reviewed a few frameworks, and we found that LangGraph is, at the time, I don't know, maybe things changed by now, was the only one that was both this flexible and while giving this very good abstraction layer. Yeah, Harrison.
Yeah, and I can maybe add some thoughts here. I think the Anthropic article is very, very good. I want to call out as well that I think they don't say don't use frameworks. They say we suggest that developers start by using LLM APIs directly. I completely agree with that. Like I think there's a ton of value in doing stuff raw. Like I mean, you guys did it from the start, like without any framework. I think there's so much value in that. I do think frameworks help. I think one of the issues which you alluded at, is sometimes frameworks can get in the way. And honestly, this is one of the things that we learned from LangChain, and why I don't think you would have ever built Qodo on LangChain, because it was a little bit too high level. It was a little bit too restrictive, and so like we heard a lot of that. We saw like this flow engineering was becoming the way to do things, and that's why we built LangGraph, like low level. The nodes and edges are just Python functions. They can be whatever you want. Much easier to debug, no hidden prompts, no hidden kind of like cognitive architectures.
Yeah.
And so actually one of the things we did was we took the Anthropic blog on agents, which again is fantastic, and lays out like 6 or 7 different patterns, and we implemented them all in LangGraph pretty easily. And I think you would be hard pressed to find another framework that could do it, because they span everything from like, I mean, it literally spans from like a single LLM call to like just a tool calling looping agent in a bunch of different workflows and parallelization. And so, yeah, I think it's totally valid. And I think it's a great idea to build things without a framework to start. I do think traditionally what we've seen is that that's great for like one project, maybe 2 that you're doing by yourself. As soon as you start moving on to many projects or start having a team, you either end up building a framework in-house or using one. And I do think the frameworks that came out when LangChain came out were all higher level and not great. But I think with LangGraph, we've tried really, really hard to make it low level and controllable so that you can build and can do all these controllable things. I think their main gripe with frameworks, rightfully so, is that it like obfuscates a bunch of stuff. And our goal with LangGraph is to make that not true. So yeah, I think it's a great article though.
Awesome. I thought maybe if it makes sense that we share a bit of our challenges with LangGraph, and then maybe hear a bit about the roadmap and vision. You have
Yeah.
hit it
Yeah.
hard.
Yeah. So I think the first one we encountered was around documentation. So once you try to do a little bit more specific stuff, for example, we wanted to use custom streaming, and that took a little bit of time to find. Eventually, you find it, and you kind of like get to learn how to navigate the LangGraph documentation. But I think at the time it wasn't geared that much towards very, I would say, low-level usage. It allowed it, but like the documentation were more focused around like using LangChain inside the graph. Then the second one, which was, I would say, somewhat a bit more painful, but I'm sure you'll get there, is around data retention. And that's very specific for our use cases. So we're using the Postgres checkpointer, which had tremendous amount of value for us just because we didn't have to deal with persistency at all. We just kind of like took the class, hooked it up, spinned up a Postgres instance, and we're ready to go. But because we have SOC 2 compliance and data retention regulation that we need to adhere to, then we need to do some custom setups in order to kind of like build that a data retention policy.
Yeah, I think both those points of feedback make sense. I mean, docs is one thing that, we're constantly trying to do better, and particularly around streaming as well. Like I think streaming's super important, and we do have a lot of different things that you can stream out. You can stream tokens, you can stream events, you can stream updates, you can stream custom things. And so I do, that's one place where yeah, I mean, documentation in general, we need to invest a lot more in, and we have basically one full-time person working on it, but we're trying to get a second. And the second point, yeah, so the second point is also super interesting. I imagine there'll be, I imagine there'll be more and more different types of checkpointers that either we or the community kind of like build, and maybe some of these will kind of like address that. At the moment, yeah, I don't think we have a good data retention story built into the existing checkpointers. But we do see that a bunch of people kind of like subclass them and write their own. Like we work with some companies who don't want to use Postgres, they want to use MySQL, and so like hopefully it sounds like that was the route you guys ended up going, and so we want to make that easy. But like yeah, I do bet we'll see different types of checkpointers emerge, and so yeah, that's good feedback as well.
Yeah. I think a good point around LangGraph. We're not using LangGraph platform at the moment, but we are using Langsmith, and that really helped us with debugging the agent. We added it pretty early on, and it was really, I don't think we would manage to get to where we are without kind of like seeing a very good picture of how it works. You can't see this with logs. It was really easy to set up, so also a very strong point.
Glad to hear. The other thing that I'll call out, I don't know, I saw a question in the chat about it. I don't know if you've explored it, but around debugging the agents is LangGraph Studio. So basically it visualizes the agents, you can interact with it there. And I saw a question about it. We used to have a desktop version, but we've actually migrated things to more of like a local version where it just runs with a pip installable package. And so I'm gonna I will try to answer that in the chat. But I saw some question about whether it was Windows only, or whether it was available for Windows. It is available to Windows. It's available for everyone. So I'll put that in the chat.
Awesome. Would you like to share a bit about like roadmap, whatever you feel like reasonable to share at this moment about what you're planning next with LangGraph? I guess like there's a lot of growing usage of LangGraph because agentic is the way to go, like solving tasks end to end, but you wanted to do that with stability. So I'm wondering like where do you see it going next?
Yeah, I think there's two big areas, and then there's some small areas as well. So one of them's around kind of like the open source library. A lot of the stuff we're working on there is kind of like pre-built patterns. So we released kind of like LangGraph Supervisor and LangGraph Swarm, and today LangGraph Reflection, which are basically pre-built kind of like architectures that you can get started with. And again, like we expect that most production agents will probably be some custom flow that the team spends time kind of like coming up with and doing the flow engineering for. But we also think these pre-built architectures are really handy for getting started. And so we're spending a bunch of time there. And then I guess the other thing in the open source would be JavaScript parity. So most people use LangGraph as a Python package, but we actually have a JavaScript package which is actually at feature parity, but it's missing some of these pre-built packages now. So we'll push on kind of like that. The other big thing we're pushing on is LangGraph Platform, which is kind of like a way to deploy these agents. I think this is probably most interesting for enterprises who are building some sort of like agent platform. And so part of this is just the infrastructure for running this at scale. But then part of this is also like making it more accessible to non-developers. So we're working on kind of like, what is a no-code, low-code version of this look like? And then also like in the same vein, once you deploy these agents, how do you string them together in a multi-agent system? And so this actually ties in a little bit maybe to MCPs, although I think of MCPs more as like agent to tools, whereas this is maybe like agent to agent.
Yeah.
But like if I have my internal agent and I want to talk to Qodo agent, like how do I do that? Sure, like if there's an API, great, I can just call the API. But like we see that a lot of these agent APIs are, they're often stateful. So now you have to think about like threads and the state and the runs and stuff like that. And so there's actually a bunch of endpoints you have to spin up. It's not just as simple as like a chat completions endpoint. And so if there was a standard protocol for all these agents, that would be really interesting. And so we're working on that. It's called Agent Protocol. We're working with other people in the open source community, including people from Glean, Llama Index, to try to get it to work with other frameworks as well as companies like Cisco, Uber, etc. And so this like multi-agent communication stuff is something that's top of mind for us as well.
Yeah, I it definitely resonates to me. Like I'll share what I mean. Just like I think when Anthropic worked on the model context protocol, and you see in their early documentation, they mostly like talked about how do we fetch data context and to the model, and we can say it's still true, but I think like it grew much more than that. You can basically run tools and the tools are not just for fetching data. They also can do some actions. Let me give you an example. Maybe run a coverage analysis and then bring back the report. It's more than just fetching the data, but rather like running the analysis. And I think that on that matter, there you can say that an agent can also be a tool. Why do you care too much if behind that MCP server, that tool, there is like a very deterministic creature, or there is an agentic one? But there are some challenges like around that, around using MCP also for agent to agents, and you just mentioned like a couple of those things. Do you have in mind, like maybe it's a bit a hard or a technical question, but like a concrete example where you think maybe MCP might fail in agent to agent discussion? We are also like thinking heavily about that agentic like MCP for agents communication, and since you're working on it, maybe you can give like an example. Don't use MCP for this type of communication because it's broken. If you get what I mean.
Yeah, well, I think there's so part of this ties into some other kind of like technical issues with MCP. So right now MCP is mostly good for running things locally on like your desktop. The connection that it stands up uses SSE, server-side events. It requires kind of like a stateful connection. That's great for local single player things. That's terrible for anything that like is on the web. So I think there's a lot of discussions around MCP there. And when we think about agent-to-agent communication, I very much think that a lot of these will happen across agents that are not deployed locally on your machine. They'll be running elsewhere. And so already kind of like that's one kind of like technical limitation. One of the suggestions for how to make that operate at scale is to basically so also MCP does a few different things. I would say most people probably just use it for tool calling. I'm actually curious, like, does Qodo support the prompts and resources from MCP, or is it just the tool calling stuff?
Just the tool calling stuff.
Yeah, that's pretty standard from what we've seen.
Yeah.
And so then like I think like one one way to overcome or one alternative would be to have some kind of like just like uh REST based communication pattern where you just call it as a tool via an API and you get back a response. The reason that and to be clear, that will work for some types of like multi-agent systems. Like you absolutely can call some agents just as tools. The places where that fails, one, this isn't directly that, but I think the main way MCP servers are intended to be used is the LLM will generate most of, if not all, of the arguments to the tool call. But oftentimes, and you can correct me if this is wrong, but oftentimes we see in like supervisor and swarm where they like just hand off kind of like some of the like where they hand off the conversation, and so now you're basically passing the entire message state over. But the second bigger reason is that sometimes you can just call an agent as a tool, but other times you want it to be stateful. And so then if you want it to be stateful, you need to have this thread ID that you're tracking. And that actually works fine for the current implementation because it has the stateful connection. But that stateful connection won't actually scale. You'll probably want some protocol that supports this statefulness, but the connection itself is not actually long living or long running. And yeah, so you'll probably want some sort of kind of like thread or conversation ID. And I think right now it's just more aimed at like single use kind of like tool calls from everything
Yeah.
that I've seen and how people are using it.
Yeah, so I'm kind of recapping. Probably, I went through and embedding, Latin space and going back to my understanding. So I hope like my compression worked well. Let me know if not. Like first is that the communication, like the SSE, for example, is like maybe not well designed for the type of interaction between two agents, rather more for an agent and a tool. And also like when you're talking about agents, that second point, maybe actually, an agent that not only like doing task end to end, maybe actually need a funnel, a channel, a way to communicate with the user, actually taking over, etc. And you need somehow to handle that. You can do some hacks. For example, you can have a shared memory. You can give that memory, pass it. Like there's different paradigms, but maybe again, we want to find like a new protocol that does that like really smoothly. And yeah, I think these are the main 2 points, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's an interesting question, right? Because I think there are a bunch of technical limitations with MCP. Or not, limitations is maybe the wrong word because I don't know if it was ever intended to do or design. I think it was designed to work with Claude Desktop, which is great. It's a desktop app, right? So it works great for that. But yeah, I think it will be interesting to see if MCP kind of like translates to a web world or whether it kind of like remains mostly for these kind of like single player desktop apps. Because clearly there's an ecosystem there, right? And there's a lot of tools.
Yeah.
But they're also all built on like the old protocol, which is again great for some things, not good for others. So very interested to see. I will say like the one place where it's clearly taken off is with coding agents, and I actually think that makes sense because that's something that we normally do just like on our computers. And so as we think about some of the MCP tooling that we want to help build, actually one of the ones that I'd love to highlight at some future time, like we want to build an MCP server for just like LangGraph docs, right? Because most models aren't actually up to date with like LangGraph code and the right syntax and stuff like that. And so I think like these types of plugins to keep up to date with like libraries, that'll actually be
Yeah.
huge, and that's a great use case for existing MCPs. So that's kind of like one of the first things that I think we're going to spend like time on in MCP land.
I'm really hoping someone will build an open source MCP for API docs where you can kind of like say, this
Yeah,
is the library I want to use. That's the question I have. I think that would be of great value. I
that's
think,
yeah. We're going to do it for LangGraph docs first, but then if it works, we'll probably generically just try to turn it into something you can do for any APIs or for any library. Sorry.
yeah, I think from my perspective, if you kind of like put aside the technical limitation, and you think about like agent communication versus tools. So tools, I think are more context for the agent. But if you think about multi-communication between agent, then as you mentioned, I think the states that's where it becomes really a complicated problem. So because it's not just about input and output to an agent to continue, it could be something, okay, I'm done. Here's all I've done, and you go next. And what's that contract look like is a very complicated issue. And we see it a lot with us. I think the most complicated code we have in our graph is when you move from one agentic node to the other agentic node, and how you manage and how you build the state from one agent to the other agent. I think that's the most complicated code we have.
I think that's exactly right. And I think it's also really interesting to think what that will look like in kind of like a generic multi-agent thing. Because I think if you're building the custom flow yourself, as you said, like you can have a lot of complex kind of like logic in there. But if like if I'm building one agent and you're building another agent,
Yeah.
and then we want some multi-agent thing to orchestrate them. I don't know anything about your graph. And so like maybe I make some assumptions. Maybe I make an assumption that there's like a messages key, a list of messages. But what other ones can I make assumptions about, and how can I do handoffs, and how can I, orchestrate it? So I think I think there's like multi-agent that like where you control everything. And then there's multi-agent in like a distributed manner where you have to make some assumptions about the other graphs, but they're
Yeah.
way less assumptions than you can make than if you control everything. And I don't think we have a good answer for the last one that I just mentioned.
It's a very hard question.
Yeah, that's great. I think it's partially relating to what you guys talk about now, is that I think if there's a lot of agents that are working together, they need to have some rules, like humans talking to each other. You need to have the workflows, the tools, the semaphores, the the different, like basically we collaborate with each other, for example, with some Git versioning, etc. So if we, for example, like define a framework with agents working together in a way that enable for example like Git progress and commit, and maybe they even review each other like work. That's one future. And I think like practically that's one of the reasons that it's easy for us to imagine an agent like that at works like a person, because then it already hooks into those workflows that we already have. It's almost I don't know if you remember those days when we tried to use SVN instead of Git, and was really not comfortable, and it took us time to get to where we are at right now with humans in the lead. I feel that the first like step in this future is the agents working together in the same flows, and finding a way to work together where humans collaborate. And then maybe in the future where like there's so much interaction between agents, there will be a new protocol that we can accept. But I think the other reason why it makes sense to work this way is because we still want as human to have control, and have the option to decide what's going to enter into my main code base or what's not. Even if you go YOLO all the way with one agent, then probably you want to wait for the second before it's going to be merged, and have another agent that will help, because so much code was written. I'm talking about like not if you're developing like a game and then you don't really care, or you do, but if you're developing like software that's gonna like impact millions, and you want also to make stop there at the code review point, and have the help of another agent to help with the code review, because there are so many lines of code that you didn't see before. So that's how I believe in, and maybe like we're going to change our entire conception that like how we're going to prompt coding agent to provide us changes that are easier to review, and also have the tools that will help us to review. That I think where we're going. That's my I guess.
I guess that would be one question I have for you guys. Like, how are you thinking about are you how are you thinking about building something that's like what's the right human in the loop level that you all are targeting? Like, have you considered something like Devin where it just goes off for hours and does some work? Or like, like obviously with the chat experience, it's more than just like, autocomplete of a line. We're moving up the kind of like spectrum, but like how far do you guys like how do you guys think about that? Where's the sweet spot? How far do you plan to take it, as much as you can share? Like, what do you think, like what are considerations? Would be really curious to hear about that.
Yeah, sure. So roughly speaking, there's many ways to to divide the software development world. You know, some people will divide the cars into colors or engines, or right. So software development can also have many dimensions, and or is like electric or Elon Musk or whatever. So I think like keep it simple, I would do simple software, complex software, simple task, complex tasks, right? So two and two. And like you can try to deal with simple software and do simple tasks or complex tasks. You can try to deal with complex software and do simple tasks or complex tasks. And at Qodo, because you're asking, sorry for the shameless plug, we're much more focused on the row for complex software, whether it's simple tasks or complex tasks. And you know, I'm not the founder or in the team of Devin, but if you look under a demo from, wow, I can't believe it's almost a year ago. Could it be? Then one of the things that they presented, for example, was that they're doing some you know, I would say like like isolated work, Upwork stuff, right? It's usually like you can bring a freelancer that try to do like a work that is outside of your own code base, and then it does that. So and Devin did like some of the work that is like Upwork task. So I believe that it's either, you know, like a simple software but complex task, or maybe even like, you know, simple tasks, simple software. That's usually the thing I think you provide. Like as an evidence, usually you don't outsource like your complicated task in your software. And we're trying to tackle the complex software. And when you're tackling the complex software, there's a lot of technology building blocks, and if you like, tools that you need to build in order to do an end-to-end task properly, without running for weeks and then coming back with sorry, that didn't work. So it's all about like different type of code review, different type of testing techniques, even like those boring stuff like how to read coverage report and do mutation testing, and telling you that you put the wrong API, sorry, like timeout for an API because you are calling an API an AI API and not a regular API. Like you need to be able to with RUG technology, by the way, that we're not going to talk about right now. So you need to be able to handle like many types of issues and bugs and many types of problems that can happen to your software in your specific complex enterprise setup. And that requires usage of many types of tools that need to be orchestrated together. And only when that infrastructure is in place, you can feel comfortable to go and ask an agent to do a task end to end for you. To put it in simple words, because I was a bit long, think about like building an autonomous car for driving on the country road, or building an autonomous car for driving in New Delhi or Hong Kong or Portland, for God forsake. Like, so and when you want to do that, like you're gonna probably take more time in understanding like all the components and all how the city works. Start to give different type of suggestions. Don't turn right here because, and right now you're not in the right route, and here's a better way, faster way. And after you understand that city pretty well, you can start driving like end to end. And that's a different approach that we're taking versus others. And it means a lot of building, but we're very serious about it. Cool. I think we're you got me into the exciting and like peach mode, so apologize for that. And I think we're about to finish for today. I have to. Oh, I just want to say that for us it was an easy decision to use LangGraph. Because we are really appreciating how you want to build workflows, and in the complex city, or building software in the complex city, you want to have more control and observability. So we didn't want something really loose. We needed that structure, and together with the flexibility, and that what made the decision. And we're really happy about it. So that's why we're like again, shameless plug for other way around, like advocating for it starting from today. We weren't public about it until like today, I think. And thank you for that support, and thank you for everyone for coming here. I know I didn't answer all the questions. Feel free to come to our Discord or tweet and like post on X or whatever and ask your question. I'll try to answer as much as we can. We are Qodo, QODO.ai, also on all the social media. And thanks again. We'll upload this in case you would like to hear or see anything. In addition, we're going to release a blog post with more technical details. It's coming up very soon, and we'll share more details about LangGraph, like working with LangGraph also, and the team. It was a pleasure. We have like a mutual Slack. Thank you, everyone, and have a good day.